Welcome back to the Beyond Face Value podcast, the podcast where we uncover the stories behind successful entrepreneurs and businesses. I'm your host, Hannah Swan, and each week we dive into the real journey to success. So let's get started. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Beyond Face Value podcast. And on today's episode, we have the gorgeous Vena Doyle, who is the owner of Brand Boost.
Hi,
Vena,
Hannah.
thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I actually am having a bit of a crisis. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this. So look, I'm delighted to be here and thank you, but a little nervous, if I'm honest.
That's okay. And thank you for trusting in me. It's always such a nerve-wracking thing. And I feel like there's so many people that have come on and spoke for the first time and they always end up doing great. So we will be fine.
Fingers crossed that continues.
You'll be okay. So we have a lot of questions here to go through.
Okay.
Would you like to introduce yourself before we get into the kind of most of the questions and give me a little bit about yourself and your job?
Yeah. So my name is Vena. I am the founder of Brand Boost, which is a marketing and brand retail consultancy. It's very new for me. I'm 10 months in business, went out on my own after a very varied career up to this point, but early doors and enjoying it so far.
Brilliant, amazing. So you've had such a dynamic career, as you just touched on, from agency work to working with Brown Thomas and Arnott. So what were some of the key experiences that shaped your path?
Ooh, I would say even before my career, a really pivotal moment for me was I actually studied politics and Irish, which is so random.
Very different. Yeah.
Very different to what I'm doing now. But I guess Irish was a subject I enjoyed in school. I didn't know what I wanted to do in college, so I chose that. Politics, I have no reason, no rational thought as to why that was chosen. But I studied that and, you know what, didn't enjoy it, but kind of wanted to get a box tick at college done. And during my time at UCD, a friend of mine was the ENS officer at the time, and he asked me to give a hand with some events he was running in the Students' Union or in the bar at the time, which I know is no longer there. And it was doing those little kind of help outs or dig outs for him that I realised I actually loved doing that. So I was only doing tiny little bits to help out, but it was something I really enjoyed in terms of organisation and driving footfall to a space. And very quickly I kind of thought, okay, I'm on the wrong track now, but how do I get onto this track? Because I had just really enjoyed doing it. So after UCD, I did a postgrad in event management in PR, which was an incredible course with Fitzwilliam Institute at the time. And as part of that, there was a 3-month placement at the end of it. So this kind of recession time, I don't want to say my exact age, but that'll tell you how long ago it was. And so the 3-month placement was actually a huge opportunity to get placed somewhere. And I was matched up with St. Patrick's Festival, which full transparency at the time, I was like, oh, I don't know if this is a good fit for me. And actually the minute I landed in there, to this day, it's still one of the best experiences career-wise. So I went in as sponsorship intern. So very quickly, you know, you're engaging with big multinational brands or Irish brands at quite a senior level seeking money. So, you know, from a commercial side, it was something I learned the importance of very quickly and, you know, how events actually need that funding to run. But equally, I think the biggest takeaway for me was looking at how a production department or a hospitality or the marketing or the programming, how all of those divisions came together and actually made things happen. So to this day, as I said, massive experience that stood to me in terms of how everything comes together. And I ended up moving from intern to sponsorship exec for 2 years with the festival. So took back all my doubts at the start and stayed and, you know, met great people along the way. And then I came to a point kind of 2 years after where I was trying to decide, do I go in-house into a business or do I go agency? And I chose agency purely because I think it would give me more experience quicker to work with a number of different brands in different disciplines. So I worked with banking, FMCG brands, charity brands, you know, a very diverse range. And I think the experience agencies gave me, I was kind of with agencies for 5 years, with, you know, Publicis and Pluto and CMS Marketing, all really great agencies. But I think what it taught me and that I take to kind of what I'm doing now is very much how to juggle a massive workload at pace.
I can imagine, yeah.
You know, because every brand you work with needs to be your number one brand. They need things quickly. They're working with an agency because they need that support, but they need it at pace. And that was something very early in my career. I learned how to juggle a massive workload very quickly. And then in 2016, I saw a role, really enjoyed agency, but it is full on, really full on.
Yeah.
And I foolishly thought, okay, if I go in-house now, this might not slow things down. I really enjoy being busy, but it was looking at kind of a new opportunity, and I saw a role come up with Arnott to be their marketing manager for Christmas. And I just thought, Arnott is such an institution, and no greater time to be in that store than Christmas time. So I thought, okay, imagine being part of that and kind of setting what it could look like for customers at Christmas time. So it was a bit of a risk. It was a 6-month fixed term placement, but I thought, I'll get in there and see what I can do.
See what I can do, work my magic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. See what I can hustle to stay on. But actually, luckily, things aligned, and I ended up staying there for close to 8 years. So went in as marketing for Christmas, and then moved on to the fashion category marketing, and then eventually head of marketing. And then up to when I departed, I was head of enterprise. So that looked after things like new business models. So pre-loved, rental, resale, all of those initiatives. It also, which I loved, was probably one of my favourite pieces of the role, was looking after pop-ups across each of the stores, and also working across the pitch campaign, which I know a lot of people would have spoken to you about that before. So really varied role, but one that I really enjoyed. Yeah,
you've had such an amazing dynamic career, and I always find it mad. It's like a lot of the people I've interviewed, they always go into one thing and do the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Do you know that way with college and stuff? But I think that sometimes you have to do them things that you don't like in order to realise, God, I actually prefer this so much better.
And I think, you know what? So many people just don't know what they want to do. And, you hear so many different people saying that's okay. And for me, it was that moment. And I guess when you said kind of what was the key experience that shaped, that was such a pivotal moment for me. And one that only, you only realise years later how important it was.
That was the moment,
and that very much shaped, politics in Irish was never going to be
your forte.
The long term. Yeah, absolutely.
So Brand Boost works with brands at different stages of their journey. What qualities or potential do you look for when deciding which business to work with?
There's probably a couple of different things. Firstly, I meet with anybody that reaches out, whether I look at their social pages or website and think I'm not really a good fit, whatever it is. I will always meet with everyone. Somebody actually gave me that advice. Always meet with everyone that reaches out. You never know, even if it's not something I can help with, I might be able to say, listen, X can help you instead of myself, whatever it might be. Going back to brands and looking at who I work with now and why I maybe selected or not selected, but felt comfortable, I guess, moving forward, is obviously product. If they've a great product, it's a no-brainer for sure. You know, and it sounds a bit cliche, but that's the truth. If they've an incredible product, one that I feel, God, I love this product, I could use it. All of those things is definitely a big piece. I think, I set up Brand Boost to really be an extension of an existing business, and so I guess with that, if a brand's open to growth and being agile to grow, they're kind of factors I look for as well, because I want to make an impact when I work with these brands, and they need to be, I guess, in the right headspace in terms of their appetite to grow their business as well. Sometimes it can come down, and this is something maybe I've learned more so in the past couple of years, business is really personalities and people, and that's what you're dealing with. And I think it's really important. Yes, it's very hard to tell, a personality of the individuals you're working with, or, the, I guess, ethos of the brand and the kind of culture. But I've always trusted my gut with people, and I get a fairly instinctive reaction when I'm chatting to somebody for the first time. So that plays a huge role, because I will say, since I set up in the short window, there have been moments where I kind of felt, actually, you know what, this isn't a right fit.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to kind of call that out, because there's nothing worse than continuing on with a relationship that, it's like a normal
like
relationship.
A dead end, isn't it?
Exactly. And there needs to be a really good fit there, that you can slot in with that team. Going back to why I set up Brown Boots, it was to be an extension, and you don't want to stick, you want to slot in seamlessly. So I think personality is really important, to me anyway. And then I think ultimately it comes down to, particularly because I'm so early on the journey maybe, is if I can really feel after an intro call that I can add value to that brand. If what they're looking for support on is something that I instinctively know all day long I can help out here. That's really important to me, because I think reputation wise and just impact and delivering is really important to me. And I know that sounds obvious, of course, but it really, really is important. And so if I, when I meet with these brands, feel I can add real value to them and support them, then that's another feature that it's an immediate yes, if I can do that.
And I definitely think it's crucial as well. Like, I find just throughout my experience, like with business over the last few years, it's like people buy into people. Do you know that way? Like, that you could have the best product in the world, but like you could be someone that's very hard to work with.
Absolutely.
And therefore your product means absolutely nothing. Do you know, that kind of way? So I found like, trust and building relationships with people has definitely been something that I found is very important, and more impactful than your product will ever be.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah, absolutely. So the retail landscape is evolving rapidly, as I'm sure you know. What are some of the biggest shifts you've seen in recent years, and how do you help brands adapt to that?
Yeah, there has been, a huge amount of shifts. I think the biggest, actually there's probably a handful of them in my experience. The first one being, physical and digital being two separate entities or two separate experiences. They are very much, there's all these buzzwords like phygital and, I don't know how I feel about that word, but it's, the merging. I think any brand that is looking at them in isolation really needs to look at them as an omni-channel experience. When you think about how you shop, or just the behaviours of how you or I might shop, you might see an ad on social, or your friend says something to you about a product, and then you're either online or you go into the store. They're not two separate entities. And I think whenever you're considering your approach in that space, you really have to consider the experience on both physical and digital, and even things right down to branding, how you look online, if you're to do a pop-up or an event in store, whatever it might be, that there's a really blended experience and continuity in your communications or your look and your feel. I think another area of focus is probably around experience. So, I've heard you speak before about how, things are no longer transactional, and you spoke about, I think on a previous episode that you did, that it's not transactional. It's about that emotive experience. And that really translates into the retail landscape as well. Totally. Every feature, if you think about, if you walked into, I don't know, somebody opens up their own store, the lighting's off, the staff are rude, there's a weird smell, all of these things. It's all I know it sounds a little bit random, but they're all just massive considerations in terms of how the customer experiences your brand and what, I guess what feeling you give them or emotional connection you have in terms of the experience. And equally things like, you're seeing such a rise around masterclasses or content online, how it's hyper personalized as well. I think that's something that's really important. And I think, I would say all of your listeners have received an email that disjoints with your experience. So say, if you went somewhere, you had an awful experience, and then you get an email that says, we know you had a great time today, we'd love to hear from you. And you're like, well, actually, I didn't have a great time, And I think brands have gotten so much slicker about that hyper personalization and how they speak to their customers. And it's no longer a nice to do, you expect it. You want the brand, you want to feel like a brand knows me, they understand me, I shop with them regularly, they know my habits. From a foundation point of view, I'm going to get an email in 3 months' time that says, Vena, we know you're running low. All of those things that are just like, that brand
they're
gets
always
me.
on the ball.
They're on it. And you're so impressed by it. You're like, you know what, you're dead right.
They remember me,
you guys remember me. Exactly. So I think that's super important. And I think, things like trends alone are the biggest disruptor at the minute. Like when you look at things like the fashion industry, before it used to be spring, summer, autumn, winter. And now you have all these trends outside of fashion and otherwise that are just coming out of nowhere. completely disrupt, and you're
once
like,
a month, like
absolutely, you know, Dubai chocolates, the current one, you know, Labubu toys for kids, whatever it is. There's all these crazy trends that I think from the retail landscape point of view, it's no longer, you know, it's investing the right time for me in research and, you know, TikTok. All these trends are, you know, brewing somewhere. And it's just getting ahead of that. Or if you're an existing brand, recognizing these trends, how can my brand adapt or adopt this trend? And if I can't adopt, and if that trend just doesn't work for me as a brand, then how do I stay relevant among the noise of that trend at the minute, if that makes sense? But I just think the trend, they're happening so quickly. And it's just how quick a brand can kind of jump on. You know, you see it across social, even from the different trends across TikTok, and how any brand can get on top of it and adapt it to make it relevant to them. So I just think that's just another factor that's really, you know, not disrupted the industry, but it's a key factor. And then probably the last point, and maybe it's something we'll touch on a little bit further, but sustainability. It would be crazy, you know,
huge
to ask that
buzzword,
question.
isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. And I don't know whether we're beyond the buzz phase and it's just part of a brand's DNA now. You know, certainly brands that I work with now, it's no longer a nice to do. It's just embedded.
Just that has to be done. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think people, you know, customers aren't stupid, and you know, not that they were before, but they interrogate, they question, they want to feel like they're doing the right thing. And I just think, you know, every brand needs to look at every element of their business, not like, oh, there's eco packaging. You know, it's not about that anymore. It's about every single facet of their business and how they're using sustainability or considering it and integrating it within their business. And equally, if you look at business models, there's things like, you know, the rental, the repair
everything,
and resell,
the shipping, how it comes over, everything,
all of that. Yeah. So that's another kind of big disruptor in the space, I think.
And just a question that came to the top of my head when it comes to do with trends. I find with smaller businesses, obviously because they might not have the budget and stuff like that to be able to go, oh, there's a new trend, like let's buy in stock and let's do this. What would you recommend for smaller businesses in order to be able to kind of keep up with trends but without putting themselves out of pocket or kind of stepping away from their main products that they have, you know, just in order to try and keep up all the time?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, even from a lead time to get product, it's, you know,
it's crazy.
It's really difficult to turn that around in time. I think it's kind of adopting, you know, and I've referred to it a lot already, but even from a social media point of view, if you can adopt the trend or speak to it or not make fun of it, but allude to it in terms of how you're communicating, or, you know, even if you're sending out an email, go, look, we know you're thinking about this, but why not think about that? It sounds very simplistic. Not every brand can jump on. And sometimes, you know what, if it's not for you and it's not in your sphere, don't just get on it for the sake of getting on it, because you see a lot of brands doing that as well, and you're like, it doesn't feel great. Messy, like, if it's close enough to your field and you feel you can adopt it through your communications as opposed to product directly, that's maybe a way to go about it. But equally, if it's a really far removed trend from your space,
just leave it.
Keep on keeping on with your own.
And pop-ups have become a major trend at the moment. What makes them such an effective tool for brands today, and how can businesses maximize their impact?
I love pop-ups.
Yeah,
I know this sounds like a ridiculous, I love pop-ups, but actually it's an area I love working across currently. I think, you know, there's a couple of different variables with pop-ups as to why they're so appealing for brands. Flexibility is a huge one. So it's about meeting your customers where they are. So if that's a shopping centre, if that's a department store, if that's a festival for 4 days, they give you really good flexibility to get in, meet your customers, get feedback, short window of time, and get back out again without massive commitment. I think another thing that they do really well is they create a sense of urgency. Like, how many times have you seen something and you see the brand saying, we're only here for 1 week, and you're like, okay, when am I getting down? I have to get there now. Why am I there already? And I think it's a really good way of getting customers down, you know, reviewing their product, looking at their space, and ultimately driving sales, because that's what pop-ups are there to do, as well as, you know, brand presence. It's also to drive sales. So they're really good in that sense. I think if you look at brands that are direct to consumer, online only, pop-ups are brilliant for if you don't want to open up a store or, you know, a long-term maybe commitment in that space. A pop-up will get you feedback from customers straight away. So you could have a new collection coming out and you're like, I don't know how much to buy into this new style. It's a little bit different for us. Trial it with a pop-up, you know, and get down and get your customers. I think from an online side as well, the main point on that is, particularly for fashion brands and beauty, it's very hard. Customers want to like almost touch and feel it, for sure. And I know personally, if I'm buying clothes, I struggle maybe with trousers to buy that online. That's something I need to try on myself.
Nightmare.
Jeans don't even, we're not even going there, Hannah. Like we just, you know, but you know yourself from a customer experience point of view, a lot of customers want to try before they buy. Equally with beauty, if they want to shade match, things like that. It's you know, there's innovation in terms of online try on, but there's nothing quite like, you know, putting a foundation on your hand and kind of going, or whatever it might be. So I think that's another really, really, really good thing that pop-ups can offer in terms of that experience, and it can be just a short window. And then I think as well, it's just getting customer feedback. It's so important. And any brand I work with, when they're doing a pop-up, I'm like, talk to your customers. Talk if they've shopped you before. How did they hear about you? You know, how many times have they shopped with you? What do they think of the existing collection? What would they love to see from you? It's such a good market research tool that I think you can get swept up with how busy it is and it's so exciting and all the rest. But actually do not forget to not interrogate, but definitely try and get as much feedback from people while you have them on site. And then I think what we're seeing with loads of brands, certainly what I'm seeing, and maybe it's my algorithm, but it provides so much marketing content for brands.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, and like I love watching, and again, maybe it's me, but I don't think it is. No. So many brands behind the scenes when they're, you know, deciding on production, how it looks, what type of fixtures they're using, packing up a van and going to the destination, or, you know, equally the challenges that are involved. And I think there's some really great people out there talking through the good, the bad, the ugly of pop-ups. And it's certainly something that I think from a marketing, it generates so much noise and gives you so much content, which is really important. So they're probably the key areas, I think, in terms of pop-ups, what they can offer right now.
I think as well in general, like people are just nosy. Do you know that way? Like, especially Irish people, I feel like they love to be like, how much is that? Like, what is this? Like, do you know, so they love to see the behind the scenes. Even
the behind the scenes are so interesting, aren't they? And it feels really natural and organic, and, you know, whether it's these people doing it really well or it's just who they are, but the human side of the business comes across really well. And I'm like you, I love watching them, and I'm like, watching keep them coming.
That's what I was, even when I was at Cosmoprof this weekend, like I was doing all the behind the scenes stuff and posting it, and people were like, I didn't know it was this big, I didn't know it was this, and I was like, neither did I, like I hadn't seen any videos, so I was loving it, posting things, because everyone was like, didn't know it was this big, like 300,000 people. I was like, this is crazy. But you can end
up going down rabbit holes equally, let's be honest, but it's definitely hugely interesting to see that side of it.
It's amazing. And many online brands dream of expanding into physical retail. What are the biggest challenges in making that leap, and how do you help brands navigate them?
I think e-commerce is incredible for driving growth and sales, but physical spaces are just completely different beasts, and it's not copy and paste from one to the other. I think, you know, something that we've touched on already around the customer experience. So you could say to me, you know, an example I've already given, Vena, you need to try out this product. I go online, within a couple of clicks, I've bought it and I know it's on its way to me. When you go into a store, it's a completely different environment. You know, everything's so much more sensory, you know, and similarly, things that we spoke to before, one off element can put you off, and you're like, oh, you know, so you have to consider so much more. I think the biggest piece is the continuity, as we spoke to, how your online brand looks. Translate that into the physical environment, have an experience, have a point of difference that makes, you know, people stop and remember your brand. I think a major challenge is the logistics of it all and the investment it takes. And, you know, there's great brands out there. I know Sophie Lee's talking about, you know, pop-ups as an example in the retail environment. Like, there's so many elements you need to consider that you don't. Staffing is a massive one, you know, the price of staffing. And if you're going into a shopping centre, their trading hours could be 9 till 9, you know, on a quiet Monday or Tuesday, and you still have to staff it for the full amount of time. I think as well, in terms of other areas, what you might think is your bestseller. This is something I always felt in a previous role. What a brand might think is their ultimate bestseller, and they go, right, when we go into this new retail environment, that's our bestseller. You'll find more often than not, what's your bestseller online is completely different in a retail environment.
That's interesting, yeah.
It is, but actually I think when you break it down, right, going back to the customer, there's a very dedicated customer going to your site and they know all about it. When you go into a different environment, you're opening yourself up to a completely different customer base. And I would always encourage anyone that's thinking of taking a retail space, wherever it might be, stand there before you make any commitment. Stand there for a day, looking strange as you like, if you have to. Look at who is walking through that space and think, would they buy my product? Am I speaking to them from a marketing point of view? And if you're seeing enough of, no, these aren't, then that's not the right destination for you. Other things I think that are really, really, really important, wherever you're going to, whoever the operations team, so if you're in a shopping centre, whoever their management team are, if you're in a department store, whoever the retail team are on site, they know their areas inside out. They know behaviours, they know what's worked well in the past, they know what hasn't worked, and try and spend as much time. And obviously these people are all really busy, but if you can sit with them and get
pick
them
their brain a bit.
Pick their brain, absolutely. And it's a free resource, you know, but it's so valuable. Like, don't assume you know it going in there. Like, work with the people around you and get as much insights. And I think the biggest thing I've seen, I guess, from the transition into the retail environment is the marketing that's required. So once you're in there, that's great. You could open up your own store and then nobody's showing up and it looks beautiful, sensory wise, incredible experience, branding's great. If you're not marketing constantly, it's all for nothing. And I know marketing's like, really sit down and look at every aspect, from your PR, influencer engagement, social strategy, could be traditional marketing, whatever it is, really consider not just a launch plan, but an always on plan. And I think that's the biggest piece. It's, you can get caught up in, well, I need my insurance and my staff. If you don't have people through the door,
it means nothing.
It means nothing. And it's something that can get forgotten because everyone's like, oh yeah, I'll put it up on social. It needs more. And not that it's easy to get into these spaces, but once you're in there, the hard part is staying there and selling. And so it's just, do not underestimate the support you need to give from a marketing side.
Yeah, I feel like you definitely need to focus on like staying with the both, because it's like bringing out a new product and never posting about it, isn't it? Then
100%.
Like you're opening a big shop and then if you don't post it, it's useless. Yeah, and it's mad. And I'd say like that because you'd be so busy and so wound up getting the thing open, you'd be like, oh my god,
that's your focus, and I don't expect that everyone has this resource to do all these things. But if you are in those planning stages, just don't forget about it, because as soon as you open, that becomes your number one priority. And if you're not nurturing that and considering it and exploring it, and if you're in a position to get a support network that can help out with marketing or whatever it might be, and I know getting the likes of Brand Booster or whoever it is an investment, but if you're in a position to do it, it's money well spent, because you can't do everything either. And I recognise that a lot of brands I work with, when they started out, were on their own and trying to do everything, and that's not possible. But just where you can, there's great resources free online that can guide you in terms of a marketing strategy, and I would definitely encourage to spend a bit of time there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've worked with brands across different industries. What do you think makes a brand truly stand out in today's competitive market?
Ooh,
I feel like that's a hard one.
That's a toughie,
isn't
Hannah.
it? I feel like there's so many kind of things.
If we're looking at right now, there has to be a call out to founder-led brands having a moment. And I don't want to say moment because that sounds like a short period of time, and that's certainly not my intent for any of these brands. But like, if I look at, some incredible brands out there, and I'm not going to include all of those because there's so many, but I mean, Amy Connolly has to get a shout out at this point, in terms of how she drives the business from a founder-led perspective, very much involved. She's almost part of that marketing mix we spoke to. I think as well, the Smooth Company and Anya and Billy, it's just showing the human side of the business. There's loads. Sophie, who we've mentioned from the wine opener, Elaine and Nicola from Bon Or, Sinead Keir. There's just so many. Yeah, you could literally go on, and I've actually just noticed they're all female, which is great. But, you know, it's just a huge part of it. I think they're the ones that are standing out. They're putting themselves front and centre. They're driving, I guess, awareness of their business. They're almost creating that human, what I've just said, that human element of the brand. And I think that really resonates with Irish customers, or, you know, people in Ireland that want to shop with brands. It gives a human element behind just going back to what we spoke to earlier, the transactional element. And I think it's really helping drive sales. I can't speak for those brands, but I would certainly imagine their impact and their presence across social or marketing comms or events, masterclasses, all these things that they're doing and being present definitely is helping them stand out as brands. It's certainly adding to it. And I think something I'm a little bit obsessed with, and I've probably spoken to it indirectly, is the brands that understand their customers inside out are standing out. So you kind of have to be obsessed with your customer, is my personal belief. You need to know where they live, how they spend their time, their shopping habits, their non-shopping habits, where they consume media, all of these things. Because when you start out, or even on looking at a year strategy for a brand, if you don't know who your customers are, how do you target them? How do you develop a plan that looks at digital marketing, physical presence, all of these things, if you don't know who they are? And I think those brands that have really clearly defined not just who their customers are, but who the gatekeepers to those customers. So if it's a more kind of teenage brand, you know, where are their parents also living and consuming media or whatever it might be. And, you know, it was such an incredible thing to see firsthand, but I work with Sarah in SOS Cookies, and Sarah's just incredible and so great to work with. But when she opened her Dundrum pop-up, which is now a permanent fixture in Dundrum, on her opening day, I can't tell you the amount of parents that came in and said, I don't know anything about your brand, but I was told I have to come here.
I have to be here.
I have to be here. And, you know, it was kind of like, that's a backhanded compliment. But you know what? It just demonstrated the point. She knew exactly who her customers were and got them there. And then the people who had to drive them there or pay for the cookie, whatever it might be, she got them as well through. So it's just, I think, if you understand your customers, your potential future customers, it's something else that stands out to me with brands that are doing really, really well. They get their customers and they know where their customers are.
Yeah, incredible. And something that I find some people aren't too comfortable with is being personal with their business or showing their face and stuff. What would you say to people that aren't, like, do you think that is something that is essential? Or, you know, how do you think it works when people aren't that kind of personal or kind of behind the scenes with their business, or they don't like showing their face?
Well, it's funny you ask that, because I'm asking myself why I'm, you know, like, this is the first, I guess, front-facing thing I've done. It's just not for everyone. You know what I mean? I had to give myself a little pep talk coming here today, and truthfully, you know, it is not easy to do. But I just think, going back to what you and I said a couple of minutes ago, like, we love seeing that side. You know what I mean? We want to go through and we want to see that. Yes, of course, we're going to consume where you see just the products or the campaign, whatever it might be. But I think, though, it feels more personable. I think certainly for me as a customer or a consumer, it definitely makes me stop in my tracks and watch. I do think it's important, but I feel like I'm being really disingenuous saying that, because I hate doing it.
Hypocritical.
And I'm still like having that pep talk right now, but it's probably the same reason I'm doing, you know, something like this. You just kind of have to put yourself out there. And I think there's really great things such as, you know, media training and all that sort of, you know, it's not something that everyone can afford to do. But if you really feel, look, I know it's important for me, my business, but I am crippled with fear or whatever it is, there's so many companies out there that you could do a day workshop, or I'm sure there's different maybe free initiatives that you could do that can support just building your confidence a little bit. And it's not easy. I'm not saying it is. I am a swan right now, but I definitely think if it's something you feel passionately is right for you and your business, but you're just stunted, just try and take the steps to make it a little bit more comfortable. And actually, this podcast is a great example, Hannah, because you definitely put me at ease. So I'll say to everyone, just reach out to Hannah. She put you at ease.
Thank you so much. And Brandon is both creative and strategic. How do you balance storytelling, aesthetics, and data-driven decision-making in your work?
Ooh, Hannah.
Yeah.
That's a question.
A lot of things to balance, I feel.
Yeah, I think storytelling is, I think maybe it's post-COVID, more of a post-COVID thing. But I feel like, Ireland supports Irish, products and brands and people. And I think if you hear a story about a brand and how it's set up, and there might have been challenges, and from maybe, circumstance like lost a job, had a bit of time, decided to set up a business. There's so many of those stories, during COVID, people maybe reflected a little bit more and felt like, now's the right time for me to start something up and start something new. I think getting that story out there, people love to hear the stories behind the brands. I think it's so interesting. I think if you look at different retailers, they're definitely focusing on an edit that supports local Irish, businesses and developers, whatever it might be. And going back to Pitch was very much set up with that in mind. In Arnott's, the initiative they do. So I think storytelling is really crucial. I think it's part of it, telling the story. Of course, great product, but the storytelling piece really captures a customer and gets them in, and then you can transition onto the sales. And then I think the aesthetics kind of backs up the storytelling. So from a branding or typography, something I went through setting up Brand Boost, traditionally, I guess, if you look at, say, luxury brands, they will often go with very clean, aesthetic, minimalistic branding. And that's to evoke, a sense of luxury and exclusivity, all the rest. And then if you look at brands whose story is a bit more playful and might be focused at a more younger customer, you'll typically see that in the aesthetics they use. So their branding might be a little bit more quirky, fun, colourful, as opposed to the black and white luxury side. So I think that's how it's the aesthetics kind of backs up the story or the background and who they're speaking to. And I think your question on the data piece, it's probably just testing that what you've come up with works. And I think that's really hard to know when you set up a business. Like even when I think of Brand Boost, it's a very simplistic logo, but my view was it's not really about Brand Boost, it's about the brands I'm going to be working with in the background. But I can imagine a lot of brands spending a huge amount of time. And I think that data piece is really important, that when you've come up with a look and a feel and aesthetic that reflects the story, that it's actually resonating with who you want it to resonate with. Like, am I speaking to my target audience with this design? And play around with it a bit. I think that's where the data piece comes in. You know what I mean? If it's a marketing campaign, if it's a headline image, whatever it might be, trial, a bit of A/B testing, like trial one, see how it performs, and trial another. And I think that's why, where the relevance of the question for me is when you look at brands rebranding, you can see that they came out initially with a certain aesthetic, and then as it evolves, they realize I'm not really speaking to my customer, or my customer has grown up or, evolved.
You want to grow with them.
And you see different rebrands, like yourself, you've had a rebrand already. So,
absolutely.
You've gone through that journey of where you started. It was perfect for when you started. And actually, as you grew, your brand grows with you and you just want to evolve and adapt. So I hope that answers the question. But when I hear data, I'm like, oh God, here we go.
It gets all mathematical. So as we touched on, sustainability is a major topic now in retail. Are you seeing a real shift in how brands incorporate sustainability into their business models?
Yeah, I think maybe when I first started out back in my agency days, I don't think it was really a conversation. You'd had these like hero brands like Patagonia or whoever it might be that were just doing it so well. But it was kind of it's nice to do, but it sounds a bit expensive and what we're doing is fine. And then definitely in the past 5 years in particular, the shift, it's very much kind of what I said earlier. It's not really about a box tick or an add-on. It's just something, and definitely any brand I speak with now, it's considered. It's part of their brand DNA. It's part of their values. It's ingrained in the business through every aspect. Every single touch point is considered with that in mind. And whether they feel passionate about it or just understand it's important to their customers, both may be true, but it's something that I'm seeing a lot of brands. It's just
a given,
a consideration now. It's a huge part of their business starting out. And I think any brands you've worked with now, from a sourcing point of view, yes, sustainability, I think some of the kind of pushback in the earlier stages was it's just not financially feasible to be as sustainable as I'd love to be. And I think customers recognise that and just want to see you doing your very best and recognise that when you start out, okay, maybe you can't source exactly where you want to, and where you start is a short-term solution of which you hope to expand and build on your sustainability kind of input. But I definitely think, even if you look at things like, I guess where I've seen a huge shift is the services that have come out of it. So I would have worked across previously the kind of rental, repair, restoration side of circularity. And I think even just looking at, vintage, Depop, they're so popular now.
Yeah, so
they're
popular.
not considered, smelly thrifting.
Yeah.
And I hate saying that, but that was a perception for such a long time. And I love vintage, I have to say.
I love vintage.
Flat out, thinking I'm separate business going on here.
I got my boyfriend set up on it. I was like, stand there, put that on. I said, you're selling this. And he sold it. He's like, this is like a game.
It's addictive.
He was like, it's so amazing.
But equally, going back to what we said about going down rabbit holes, and there's so many tips, tricks, and I'm flat out now trying to figure that out.
It's incredible.
It really is. And I think, it speaks again, going back to the customer, which I feel I'm being super repetitive on. But, I think initially, if you look at the luxury houses before, I think, and I can't speak for the big dogs, okay, but it definitely felt like it was something they resisted maybe a little bit.
Totally.
And it was disjointed with their luxury and newness. And, I think what we've seen, and I look at things like, say, Gucci did a collaboration, I think it was with The Real Balenciaga did one with Reflaunted, which is another kind of platform where you could bring back, your previous Gucci garments or whatever it might be in exchange for credit to The Real. So these brands, whilst their customers right now may not care hugely about sustainability, I think these guys have started to recognise, okay, our next, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they care about this.
Yeah.
This is important to them. And if we are to acquire them as customers moving forward, we need to be in this space. So I think that's the biggest shift I've seen in sustainability in terms of these kind of bigger brands really committing and getting on board with it. And I actually love the pre-love space. There's a brand, Luxury Exchange. I don't know if you follow them.
I know them, yeah. They do all the handbags and everything.
Incredible. So it's dangerous, I will say to any of your listeners that are listening right now, approach with caution, because they're, I guess from a business side, they've utilised the broadcast channel on Instagram so effectively. I have not seen another brand do it as well as they do. And I have been a victim of purchasing numerous times, but they are somebody who, they've just cracked the pre-love space with, their price point, how they market it. They know who their customers are. And I think they're a really good masterclass in terms of a pre-love brand and really capitalizing on how they sell and doing things a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. And even like stuff like, I feel like I always see like the Kardashians now, they're always wearing like, they'll go on a red carpet and it's like, oh, this is vintage Dolce and Gabbana dresses and all. Like, you never really see them anything new, but it'll be stuff that it may look new, but it's from like the 80s.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And
that's almost more in fashion now,
and
isn't
I'm like,
it?
wow, I love that. Like,
vintage Tom Ford and all that.
Everything. It's kind of like a buzzword again. It's like, oh, vintage. Like, entrepreneurship comes with its fair share of challenges, obviously. So how do you stay motivated and focused when things don't go to plan?
I definitely didn't go into entrepreneurship with these rose-tinted glasses that I think can sometimes happen. So I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And so from day dot, I saw the grit, the resilience, the hard work, the setbacks, the sacrifices, all those things that my parents went through as part of their own journey. So I don't know whether that delayed me going out on my own or it was, a really good first-hand experience to see growing up. I think that, no different to life itself, there's always going to be setbacks. And is it frustrating? Yes. But I would say that I'm very much solution driven. And I think that's something that I learned in the agency days, going back to starting out. You kind of had to be one step ahead all the time and go, right, if this doesn't go to plan, what's plan B? And something that stuck with me from career was always, or from agency, was what if? And if you can answer a solution to the what if this happens, then it helps you be a little bit more comfortable with when things don't go wrong. I mean, nobody loves when that happens, but I think it's how you kind of find a solution. For me, that was always important with the team. Any team I've worked with, it's not an issue if things go wrong, but we need to be solution driven and find something quick that's going to, you know, help us pivot and work and go in a different direction. On a personal level, he'll die with me saying this, but I have an incredible fiance. He too is in the business space. He is such a good person. We're yin and yang personality wise, but he's incredibly calm, incredibly measured, and he will talk me off a ledge sometimes if things are going catastrophic. But he is just such a good sounding board as well. From day dot, he was able to give me advice. And it sounds like I'm gloating now, but I have an incredible family and an incredible bunch of friends that have been super supportive and knew ultimately this is what I wanted to do and kind of backed me. And one thing I actually think is really interesting that I started, a friend of mine, Evie, started her business in and around the same time I was starting mine. And we agreed that we'd meet once a month. And I'm only saying this because it's actually such a great help to me. But we agreed to meet once a month, and it's called an accountability lunch. And we can't talk about our friendship or what's going on. It has to be all things focused on our business. Brilliant. Because I think you can very easily set up goals for yourself or things you try to, but you can put them on the back burner because there's so much going on. But if you know you have that meeting with a friend that's going to hold you accountable, it's something that has actually been a really great thing. So I don't know if that will help somebody, but it certainly helped both of us to keep us on track. And then I guess as a final point, there's so many people out there willing to help new businesses. I think from an advice point of view, there's a great network in Ireland and in Dublin that I've found super supportive that will, you know, if you've a question, a query, if you're unsure, there's always people out there to help. So maybe put yourself out there with networking events, things like that. But there's just an army of people ready to help. And that certainly helped me over the past 10 months, particularly when things go wrong. Yeah,
I can imagine. And I feel like sometimes people not take it for granted, but they don't really realise like the foundation that, you know, their boyfriend has or fiance or, you know, their family, like, because I find even like with my boyfriend, if it wasn't for him, I feel like he's very grounded. He's very like he's an engineer, so he's very logical, very like, okay, well, if this doesn't work, this is this where I'm like, do you know what I mean? So I feel like you don't really realise how important it is to have them kind of people around you to keep you kind of surface level and kind of not get that stressed about things. Yeah. You know, I think it's so important. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. And something that you were obviously heavily involved with before is pitch. Tell me a little bit about that.
Pitch is just one of those campaigns that I think in years to come I'll still look back at so fondly. The idea came about from my former CEO. He had the idea around COVID. And we were noticing that so many businesses were registering. I don't know how. I think it was something he always wanted to do. And then the timing aligned post, you know, during COVID.
At the time.
Yeah, so many people were registering and setting up businesses. And it was something that Arnott's very much focuses on supporting Irish brands and communities. It's very much part of their DNA. And so it launched year one, and by all accounts, I mean, I'm gone a year now, but even the most recent year, incredible breadth of brands. And from a personal level, I've met great people along the way. You know, Ciara from Brushstock. She is one of a kind, and I'll always be grateful to Pitch for introducing herself and Gary. But there's so many incredible brands coming out of that campaign, and I think it's so important that Arnott's do it, and I've no doubt they'll continue to do it because so many brands speak to it now, and it's such a great learning pad. I think, you know, if you're lucky enough to get into, you know, one of the finalists, just the nurturing and the mentoring that you get as part of the BTA team there, it's a really great initiative, and I think it, gives you the right framework and group of people around you to grow your business and grow quickly. So listen, it's something that I'll always look back on super fondly working across.
Yeah. And I think it's a very smart thing as well, even from a business perspective, like, because I find like when businesses get so big, the likes of Brown Thomas and Arnott or whatever, they can tend to kind of go very international and think bigger and bigger. But I think it's very smart to stay so connected to your people, Irish businesses. And I think like that, they kind of, there's a mutual respect there. Do you know that kind of way?
Oh, for sure. And I think, Arnott's is an institution and Brown Thomas, but I think what they do really well is strike the balance of incredible international brands that, Irish people want to shop and, go into their stores. They've incredible experiences, but they balance that supporting and nurturing local brands really, really well. And, they're the leaders in their space and they've the capacity in which to support. So no, it's definitely something that they do really, really well.
And for brands looking to enter the retail space, what's one piece of advice you'd give to them to set themselves up for success?
One piece.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably hard to find one piece.
I feel like I've spoken to a lot of maybe areas. One piece I would look for. I think going back to the biggest marketing that you're going in. So, somebody I used to work with used to always say, it's easy to get a product on the shelves. Selling it is a whole different beast. And actually, it's so true. It's so simple, but it's actually so true. You have to launch it with such noise and effectiveness, and not just launch it. It's, going back to kind of what I said already, and apologies, this is repetitive, but it's just so important. And I've seen it, brands, they might go into a space and they're like, we're here, amazing. You have to keep going. You need to be doing events. You need to speak to your customers, do master classes, do YouTube tutorial, be obsessed with marketing where you are and how you can get the product. That to me is just the most important thing. I'm not saying it's easy to get into, a department store or, another physical space. But once you're in there, the hard graft really begins once your products are on those shelves and how you market it and communicate and drive those sales. Because, I think sometimes the expectation can be, well, we're in there, whatever it might be. It's on you as the brand owner to really drive those sales. And I know that's not easy to hear because they're like, well, I'm already running a business and doing my best. But actually it really is. Nobody's going to drive your brand as much as you are. Nurture the relationships on site, do as much as you can in that way. But ultimately it's down to you to drive awareness and footfall to your product.
Incredible. And looking ahead, where do you see Brand Boost in the next 5 years? And how can our listeners connect with you to follow your journey?
Well, you can connect on LinkedIn or on Instagram. It's brandboost_.ie. But I will say I am on the lookout for some social media support. So anybody listening, please reach out because that's probably the most challenging bit of the business for me. I think 5 years is tricky, Hannah, to be honest, for me to.
Time, isn't it?
It really is. But I think, if I had another 5 years of how the first 10 months have been, I would be beyond happy. It's been a really varied year for me, but one I've really enjoyed. And I think if I can continue working with the brands I'm working with now, I would be absolutely over the moon. It's really hard to preempt, and I think so much of this space that I'm operating in is changing. For me, it's just keeping on top of those trends. I think, I would love to really compound my position as the go-to for any brands starting out. And equally, some of my clients now are very well-established brands, but they're looking for support. I just want to be that first go-to. And so I hope I can build on that in the next 5 years.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Vena. I really appreciate you coming on and trusting in me. I know it's not that bad. It's fine. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.